Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians. Today we pick up the reading at the end of chapter 1. We're at verse 23, and we're going to read through verse 4 of chapter 2. Now, in this paragraph, Paul returns to the subject of his coming visit to Corinth. You remember earlier in chapter 1, he had answered the question some had about Paul's integrity because he had said he was going to visit, but then he changed his plans. And somebody said, well, Paul, you can't depend on him because of that. But he said, circumstances change. I'm still coming, but my travel plans have changed. I'm coming a little bit later than I thought. But now he begins to give the specific reason why his plans changed and why his coming visit was delayed. Notice what he says. So we're in chapter 1, verse 23. Now I call God as my witness, I stake my life on it, that it was in order to spare you that I did not return to Corinth. And notice that. I did not return from my visit as quickly as I had anticipated, but it was not lack of integrity on my part. I was looking to spare you. Now, what does that mean? What do you mean to spare them? Not that we lord it over your faith, but we work with you for your joy, because it is by faith you stand firm. So I made up my mind that I will not make another painful visit to you. For if I grieve you, who is left to make me glad, but you whom I have grieved? I wrote as I did, so that when I came, I would not be distressed by those who should have made me rejoice. I had confidence in all of you, that you would all share my joy. For I wrote you out of great distress and anguish of heart and with many tears, not to grieve you, but to let you know the depth of my love for you. Now, Paul makes a reference to a painful visit. At some point, he had made a visit to Paul that previously has not been disclosed, but it was painful. And so he put off coming back again because he wanted to make sure it was not another difficult visit that would hurt them and grieve them. So trying to put all the timeline together, from what he says here, we know, you remember we mentioned earlier, that Paul founded the church around AD 50, AD 51, somewhere in that time frame. And then he wrote these two letters we have, 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, in the latter part of AD 54. So about 4 years passed between Paul's initial visit to Corinth and the writing of these letters. But now it seems that after he wrote 1 Corinthians, trying to correct some of the problems, you remember if you read 1 Corinthians, there are a lot of issues in Corinth Paul was trying to address, a lot of them. Sometime after he wrote that letter, it seems he made a visit to them to try to correct some of these things, and it was painful. There was some conflict involved. He's trying to straighten out some problems, and everything did not go well. It was a painful visit. And then it seems he wrote another letter that we don't have. Remember, notice he says, that's the reason I had to write as I did. So Paul had made a painful visit at some point that's not recorded in the book of Acts. And then he had written another letter that's not preserved for us. And then he had intended to make another visit, but he's put that off because of that pain of the second visit. And so now he's writing 2 Corinthians, getting them ready that I am coming, and I am coming soon. So in other words, what we have in the book of Acts is the story of Paul, but it doesn't tell everything. There's parts of the story that are not told. And so somewhere between the founding of the church and the writing of 2 Corinthians, somewhere between actually 1 and 2 Corinthians, Paul made a quick visit to the church in Corinth that did not go well. There was conflict, and there was argument. There was a lot of heated discussion. And so Paul returns not having accomplished all he wanted to do, and he's coming again, but he didn't want it to be another painful visit. So now he's writing 2 Corinthians, still trying to correct some of those problems, but also to prepare the way for the upcoming visit, which will really be his third visit. Interesting, is it not? We pick up these tidbits of information. We've seen this kind of stuff before in the letters of Paul. For instance, when he wrote Galatians, you remember he talked about a trip to Arabia. That's not mentioned in the book of Acts. Luke, when he wrote Acts, just didn't tell us about that visit to Arabia, but Paul did. And also Luke in the book of Acts does not tell us about the visit between 1 and 2 Corinthians, but Paul does. We know there was a visit, however. That was painful. He's preparing for another. He doesn't want it to be painful. So that's why he's writing 2 Corinthians. Okay, In tomorrow's session, we'll go further in 2 Corinthians as he talks about some of the things he wants them to think about before he comes back again. So join us next time for our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians.